We're going to continue now our discussion about marketing mix elements. We're going to discuss the following two. We've already talked about products and price. Now it's time to talk about place, which really it really means marketing channels, right? So place is essentially how do you get the products to the final consumer, right? What are the series of steps and maybe partners that you need to make sure that that product or service that you are making or delivering actually gets to the people that you're trying to target. So, what is a marketing channel? It's basically a group of firms, okay, that enables those products and services to get to the customers that you are actually intending on targeting, right? And that's going to include everybody from your suppliers on the top end of the channel, right? On the upstream side, it's going to involve the company itself that makes the product or service. And then it might involve other intermediaries that make sure that that product gets to the final consumer. Okay, so this idea of an intermediary, it's the idea of a middleman, right? It's a company that doesn't make something per se, but it makes sure that that thing that was made by somebody else or that service that was developed by somebody else actually gets to the right customer at the right time, in the right place, and that they can take ownership of it. And this is very valuable. You can actually see how valuable channels are by looking at what Amazon is doing to try to improve their delivery services. What do I mean by this? Well, one of the biggest disadvantages that Amazon has compared to other stores like Walmart is the fact that the moment that you put on an order and you pay, you don't get the product right away, which is what happens when you go to a traditional store. I know everybody knows this, right? But there is value on ownership. So the fact that companies like Walmart or Target or CVS exist means that you can actually take ownership and use the product right away, right? So there is value associated with this. There is also value on getting that product when you want it and at the time you want it, right? And this is something that intermediaries actually do for you. So they actually do create value in the marketplace. And one type of intermediaries are called retailers, right? Retailers are are companies that sell directly to the final consumer. Okay, that's what makes retailers unique, is that they have direct contact with the final consumer. So they actually move the products and services from their manufacturers all the way to the consumer that it's gonna finally take on the use of the product. Okay. And they create utility in many ways, but mostly in the ways we have already described it, by making sure that the product's available to the people that they want the product at the time they want it, and they could actually directly pick it up and use it, right? So it has all this value that it's created. It's not just the cost, and they do actually play an important role in the distribution, especially of products that uh, have relatively low cost. We'll talk about when selling directly and when using retailers actually makes more sense in a few slides. Now, what is direct marketing? Direct marketing is when you do not use intermediaries. So what you do is you use non-personal media to directly uh, communicate with your customer and get their products to them. How can you do that? Well, in the old days, this was mostly done through catalogs, right? So there were catalogs of products that were sent to people, and then they could put in an order, and then the product will actually come to you. You could do the same thing using the phone, right? You see all these infomercials if you stay late at night and you still have a TV with a cable box that will urge you to call them to put an order on something that you didn't know you needed, but you really desperately want after listening to somebody for 2 minutes talking about it, right? And then finally, you have the internet, and this is really what has made direct marketing an absolute must in many occasions, right? Direct marketing right now, because of online sales, it's one of the fastest growing areas of businesses, And companies like Amazon are really wreaking havoc in many industries. You can see JCPenney and Sears are barely hanging for dear life when they were in very prominent positions before. By the way, Sears and JCPenney are both retailers. Okay, Amazon is a retailer too, by the way. Okay, very good. So we've already talked about direct marketing. Direct selling is when you actually directly sell the product face to face. This is when somebody, calls, knocks on your door, and wants to talk to you. Face to face sales are a lot less prevalent now because it tends to be expensive, but it is used very heavily in business to business market. So when one company is trying to sell products to another company, picking up the phone and calling, or going actually on site to the company with one of your salespeople is a very, very common strategy. In fact, most of the sales are actually closed using direct marketing for large contracts in a business to business environment. Okay. What is a wholesaler? Wholesaler is different from a retailer in the sense that it does not deal directly with the final consumer. So they buy products from either other wholesalers or producers, manufacturers, and they sell them to either other wholesalers or retailers. They do not have direct contact with the final consumers. And what kind of utility they add to the story? They help with breaking down order sizes, distributing the products to maybe locations where it's hard to do so. So they do add utility because they are part of the network that enables the product to get to the final consumer, but they do not have contact with the final consumer. Now, notice, other than wholesalers, you could also have in your distribution channel an agent, which is it's somebody who does not take ownership of the product. This is the important part. So they act like a wholesaler, but they are different in one way. Wholesalers, when they buy a product to sell it later to, for example, a retailer, if anything happens with that product when it's en route and it's been already bought by a wholesaler, the wholesaler is liable for that product. Agents cut deals between manufacturers and wholesalers, or wholesalers and retailers, but they do not take ownership of the product. So what they do is they connect firms when getting the right people involved in the job might be complicated. This is used a lot, especially in international markets, when you need to get to a market where maybe you don't have already established relationships, using an agent so that it can actually get you in contact with the right people and the right firms. It's usually paramount. Okay. What is supply chain management? Well, it's basically putting together all these pieces that we have discussed so far. So it's essentially creating partnerships with channel members. Those are companies that are part of your channel of distribution. So they will be agent, wholesalers, and retailers, to basically try to increase efficiency and efficacy, right? Try to get the job done, efficacy and efficiency. Try to make sure that the cost at which these products are actually getting through the channel distribution is as low as possible, that there is no waste, and that the process works properly. So it's as fast and as inexpensive and has as little impact in the environment as possible. Now, notice that supply chain management requires usually complex technical knowledge that enables you to set things up from a transportation and logistical perspective. So it's not just a simple task. It's particularly important in consumer channels because you're trying to reach a lot of people, but even in a business-to-business environment, supply chain management plays a key role. Okay. Here is a depiction of how channel distribution could look like for a consumer market. And you have here on case A, this is what we call direct marketing or the direct channel. And the reason why it's direct is because the producer is in direct contact with the customer and there are no intermediaries or other firms in between that get involved in getting those products and services to the market. Okay, here you have a channel that involves retailers. So this is not direct marketing, but it's a fairly short channel of distribution, and the length of the channel is the number of intermediaries that are in between the producer and the consumer. And the reason why you increase the length is when you're trying to reach many people, you might actually need more people, more companies involved in the process to make sure that you can get enough market coverage. Okay, so as you have many retailers here, there is only one retailer depicted, but you might have 20, 30, 40 companies that are retailers that you are using for distributing your product. The moment that you go to large numbers, including a wholesaler might be important, right? So here you have a longer channel of distribution, case of C, right? Where not only you have several retailers, maybe, although only one is depicted here, but you could have a large number of these, right? Retailers to get to the final consumer. But actually there are one or more wholesalers involved. Okay. And then finally, here is the longest channel of distribution that we have in this diagram, with at least an agent, one or more wholesalers, and one or more retailers. Okay, so the length of the distribution channel is a function, like I said, of the number of intermediaries between the producer and the consumer. And the reason why you put more intermediaries in between is because you are trying to reach a broader target market, and the way to get there is by involving more firms that enable you to reach more customers. Okay, and strategically speaking, other than the length of the distribution channel, like we were discussing before, another important variable that you need to decide is the degree or intensity of the market. Intensive distribution is essentially when you're trying to be present in every potential outlet. So an intensive distribution is when you try to be everywhere to make sure that the customer has access to your products with convenient. This is something that is done, for example, in products like soda, right? Where you want people to have easy access to your product when they want it, and because of that, an intensive distribution makes sense. Selective distribution, on the other hand, is when you only use a few channels of distribution, and in particular a few partners within those potential channels to reach your consumer. Okay. The reason why you might want to move from intensive to selective is because you are trying to emphasize the uniqueness of the product. So if the product's everywhere, it's hard to believe that it's unique in any way, right? So if you're trying to go for a positioning that it's along the lines of uniqueness and or exclusiveness, having a selective distribution channel makes sense. Plus also it tends to be more inexpensive. Okay, although that depends on the actual partner that you choose. And then finally, you have exclusive distribution, and this is something that is used by usually luxury or upscale brands to try to emphasize the unique benefits and features of the product. Who uses exclusive distributions? Well, many brands do, but let's talk about a few that come to mind right away. If you're interested in watches, a company that does exclusive distribution is called Rolex. Maybe you've heard about them. And what they do is they have a network of exclusive retailers that they only sell Rolex brand watches. Okay, they cannot sell anything else, and they only sell these products in that particular boutique. Right? So this makes the product perception a lot more upscale, on top of their high prices, materials, design, everything else that goes into the experience is not just that. But exclusive distribution is another important piece of the puzzle to make sure that these watches are actually perceived as luxurious and unique. Another important aspect of the distribution decision from a strategy perspective is logistics. This is all the steps included into physically taking the products all the way from the raw materials until they get to the consumer. Okay, so there is two parts. There is an inbound part and an outbound part. Okay, so it's not only what gets out of the company, but also what comes back inside. Important to make this distinction. This has to do with things like consumer returns, right? So if you are using any channel of distribution, you don't only have to think about how to get the products from the customer, but also how to get those products back in case your customer wants to return something. Okay, so that's also part of the logistics problem. Okay, and there are different aspects of logistics, so you're going to have to worry about what kind of transportation modes are you going to use. For example, here in the United States, a lot of the heavy cargo is actually distributed using rail, using trains, whereas in other countries, because of the difference in infrastructure, you might actually go to 18-wheelers. Doesn't mean that we don't use 18-wheelers here in the US, but you need to think carefully about which one of those modes of transportation is going to be better suited for what you're trying to do. Rail can move things for cheaper for the most part, but it's a lot more inflexible. So it depends really what you're trying to do from a transportation perspective, right? You're also going to have to think about warehousing. Where are those warehouses located, right? And when you're designing a distribution network, the location of the nodes is a key aspect. So which markets are you trying to reach, and how is that network going to be set up to minimize cost and maybe efficiency, right? Speed. Okay, and materials handling is how you actually get those products from one place to another. And now we're going to talk a little bit about our last P in our marketing mix, which is promotion. Promotion is mostly about how you communicate with your customer and how do you basically let them know what the key benefits of your brand and products are and why they should actually establish a relationship with you. Within promotion, what we're going to try to be doing is, like I mentioned, communicate with customers to try to convey the benefits of the product. But we're going to try to do this in a persuasive way, right? So we're trying to sway consumers into purchasing our products or services. Okay, and for that we might have to engage in different strategies for communicating with them, right? Typical tools in the promotional mix are going to be advertising, personal selling or sales, publicity, and sales promotion. I'm going to talk about each of them in a little bit more detail as we go. Now, one of the key aspects to understand is because the different tools that we can use for communication with customers, we need to have some sort of integrated strategy, right? We need to make sure that our advertising says things that are congruent and similar to what our salespeople are telling us. And also, if there is a promotion, that it's in conjunction with everything else that I'm discussing. So we need to basically have a common theme or story that enables us to have similar messages distributed across all these different tools. So we need to make sure that it's integrated, right? And we call this integrated marketing communications, or IMC. Now, what is advertising? Advertising is a paid non-personal communication that is transmitted traditionally through some sort of mass media, right, such as TV, right? Although more and more the industry is moving from mass media channels to much more targeted advertising, a lot of it in the form of online ads. Okay. So commercials, there are a wide variety of commercials. I know as a professional consumer, you know a lot about commercials. You've been exposed to probably millions of them by now. So it's not a surprise for you. In fact, if you ask anybody that doesn't know much about marketing, what marketing is about, most of them are going to tell you advertising. So advertising is probably one of the most prevalent and more clearly identified actions that marketers actually engage with in the marketplace. Right? So what is personal selling? Personal selling is when you have a direct person discussing with you the product or the service, right? So it's when you have a paid but direct, so as opposed to the advertising, which is non-personal, interaction with the firm, right, through their salespeople. What is the biggest advantage of personal selling is the flexibility. Is the fact that once that you have a person talking to you about a product or a service, that person can help you and first answer any questions that you might actually have about the product. Also, gather information about what your needs and benefits that you're seeking are. So because of that, they can actually cater to what it is that you're interested in, instead of giving you some sort of generic message like it will be case of advertising. And salespeople actually do different functions, right? So you're going to have, depending on the product category and the strategy of the firm, you're going to have different salespeople. You're going to have salespeople that are mostly order takers. That's where you call in on a firm, for example, and somebody answers on the phone when you're trying to buy something. And for the most part, they still will clarify and answer questions if you have any, but their role is a little bit diminished. You have creative salespeople. These are people that are trying to solve a problem that you have and with their products and services that they have at their disposal and their knowledge. And this is a very important role in what makes salespeople different from other ways of communicating with customers, because you are taking a much more customer-centric approach and you're trying to solve a problem that they actually care about. This is very common in business to business. Salespeople are used more heavily in business to business, especially because order sizes are bigger, and that enables you to have a person behind the product. For the most part, when it comes down to other products, salespeople might be too expensive unless the product has a big price tag. So this is why you sell salespeople selling cars but not cans of soda. Okay. And then you might have people that are just support salespeople, and those are there if you require any information, but they don't necessarily engage with the customers otherwise. So this kind of take a secondary role in the process, and they enable people to ask questions if they have them, but not necessarily take front and center uh, role when it comes down to the ordering process. And this is something, for example, that you will see in stores like Best Buy, where there are salespeople around the floor, but you can still buy things without actually having to go through them. But if you need any support, they'll be there for you. Okay, now when it comes down to selling and salespeople, one of the things that it's important to understand is what is the selling process. Okay, and it has different stages. This is one of the first things that you will learn if you ever take a sales class. The first aspect of selling is prospecting. This is about finding people that will qualify or that you think would be good candidates for selling a product. Okay, and this could involve very complex and sophisticated analytical techniques that enable you to find these people, or it could be more rudimentary, right, depending on the technical sophistication of the company. Then after that, you're going to have to approach the people that you think are good prospects. This might require multiple contacts. So for example, if you're trying to get to talk to somebody inside a firm because you're a salesperson that is selling products to another company, you might have to make multiple contacts with the firm, call multiple times before you actually get to speak to the person that actually can make any decisions when it comes down to buying those products. Then after you've found somebody that is potentially interesting and is willing to talk to you, what you're going to have to do is the presentation, where you are going to discuss what the benefits of the product or service are and why the person should actually buy or acquire or use the product or service that you are actually representing. Then after the presentation is done, there might be some difficulties or questions or objections that are raised from the consumer side. So, the product might be good, but what about this? Or I've heard from a competitor and this is what they are doing. What can you do for me? Right? So you're going to be able to handle difficulties, objections, and questions at this point. And then after that, you need to move to close. What is closing? Closing is actually uh, obtaining the commitment from the consumer that they are going to buy. I should say customer, because in business to business, we call them customers, right? So you need to obtain the commitment from the customer that they're going to actually buy the product. And then finally, the last step is follow up, right? To make sure that people are happy after they bought the product. And if they are not, try to fix it so they can continue buying your products or services. Now, another tool that is at your disposal in the promotional mix is publicity. Publicity is also non-personal like advertising, but it's also non-paid. So it's non-personal and non-paid, right? So these are tools that the company uses to sway the public without having to spend any money, right? So what you do is you put in, for example, a press release, right? And you send that to all the news agencies. So if you are a company that people know, then the news agencies will probably pick up on the story and they might run a news piece about it. Okay. So what you're doing is you're trying to insert information about the company or the product category that you're interested, or something that you're working on right now, like R&D, whatever it is, right? And because you're trying to get the word out there about the company. And what you're doing is you're using a tool like Publicity that it's non-personal, but it's not paid also, right? So you are not paying the news agencies to talk about your company. What you're doing is you're putting together the content just so that it's easier for them to write the news story, which is obviously what uh, news agencies will want, but you are just not directly paying them. Uh, Many companies will have their own public relations department or person, depends on the size of it, that is essentially trying to obtain favorable attitudes about towards the company based on all these news pieces, stories, and content that they put together. So how is advertising and publicity different? They are both non-personal ways of communication, but advertising tends to be more persuasive, right? So you're trying to convince people about why they should buy your product. And it could be informative in some cases where you're trying to tell a story about, you know, why your product's better, not necessarily try to convince by provide information about it as well. But publicity, it's typically not persuasive. If it is persuasive, you're not going to get people to pick up on it. So publicity tends to be mostly informative, where you are, for example, describing the reasons why people should exercise more. And guess what? This comes from Nike, right? So they're trying to help you and tell you all the reasons why you should do exercise, not necessarily all the reasons why you should buy my products, which will be a much more persuasive message, right? Advertising is directly towards customers doing something, usually buying a product or engaging with other customers. And when it comes down to talking about, benefits or something that they like, right? So what you're doing is you're trying to get people to do something. Publicity, typically, it's not uh, this way, right? It's usually providing information to the customer, but not asking them to do anything. Okay. Advertising, like I said from the beginning, the big feature of it is that it's non-personal and paid, so you need to pay to be able to advertise. But publicity is free, or at least it will cost you the salary of the person that is doing the publicity efforts within your firm, but you don't actually have to pay for the bandwidth. Okay, so you don't need to pay the news agencies that are going to be publishing any of that information. Okay. And another thing that it's important is advertising. For people to remember your message, you're gonna rely on repetition. So you're gonna have to repeat the message multiple times. Whereas publicity, you're not gonna be repeating it. You're gonna spread the message one time, maybe through multiple media. And because of that, there might be some overlap, but there is no repetition of selling the story over and over and over again. Okay, so one is based on repetition, the other one is not. So you need to come up with more stories in the case of. Now, to continue, what is the impact in publicity of uh, social media and digital media? Well, it's huge, right? So you have some of these versions of publicity that have appeared right now because of digital and social media campaigns, right? So now you have buzz marketing, which is basically a variation of traditional advertising that basically tries to create a desire or interest in the product by using some online means. Okay, so it could be using social media, for example. Okay, what they are trying to do with these companies is trying to get you to talk about the product. So if you go to Twitter and people are talking about a particular product, that could be considered marketing buzz. Uh, Related to this, you have viral marketing, kind of like a subsection of marketing buzz or buzz marketing, which is essentially trying to get people to do the advertising for you, right? So if you have somebody that is really excited about your product and it goes into their Facebook page and shows a picture of them using your product and then gets all these people to talk about it. That's essentially what you're doing. Have this message pass from one person to another to another. That's why we call it viral, right? Because it's like a virus that gets transmitted from one to another. Maybe not the best time to talk about viral, but it is what it is, right? And the tools like Twitter, for example, have made, or YouTube, right, where you tag somebody or you share it with somebody, have made this uh, influence of people particularly important. So you have here the figure of the influencer, right, which is somebody who has a big network of contacts. And for example, if you were in YouTube, it could be like the number of subscribers you have. And because of that, if they post a video talking about any product or service, a lot of people are going to watch it and maybe help them make their mind about it. So this idea of viral marketing, it's really big right now. In fact, there is a lot of controversy as to whether uh, everybody should disclose up front whether they are getting paid for this, because while it started like something that was non-paid, now has shifted to become one of the big, I don't know big, but one of the important expenses within the promotional budget of any company is having these payments made to influencers to make sure that people are talking about you in the social nets. Okay. And while the tools that we have discussed so far are mostly about communication, sales promotion, it's providing direct incentives for people to buy your products. This can take different forms. So some of the tools that you have are things like store displays, where you can make more clear to the customer something about your product. It could be things like samples and demonstrations, where you actually get to try the product before you buy it. Right? When you go to the grocery store and they give you a little portion of the product to see if you want to buy more. More directive incentives like coupons or contests and sweepstakes, right? Refunds, etc. So these are all tools that provide incentive for people to actually buy the product. Right? So what it does is it stimulates basically direct demand for the product and hopefully enables you to sell more products. Right? Now, we have discussed multiple tools. The question is strategically, what should you do? Should you focus more on the tools that talk directly to the customer, or should you emphasize direct incentives to maybe other parts of the channel of distribution, right? So what do I mean by this? Well, there are conceptually two different ways you can go here, okay? One is strategically, you can decide that the channel of distribution is to play the main role. And then what you're going to do is you're going to provide incentives to the channel, which will be things like wholesalers and retailers, to carry your product and go beyond their way to push that product to the customer. How do you do that? For example, by providing an incentive to a retailer to sell more of your product. You could do that by providing, for example, like quantity discounts. So let's say that you buy my product, let's say that I sell gum, right? And you buy them by the box. So each box, let's say that it has 100 packages of gum. So what you could do is you could tell the retailer, look, for every 3 boxes that you buy from me, I will give you a box free. Something like that will entice the retailer to push your product into the consumer, because the more they buy for you, the cheaper it's going to be for them, and hence the more money they are going to make. So what you're doing is you're enticing the channel to basically promote your product and get the results through that. We call that push strategy, okay, because it goes through the channel. The alternative to that is called pull strategy, which is what you do is, if you are the producer, you go to the consumer directly instead of like before, which is through the channel, right? Okay, that was the push strategy. The pull strategy is you go directly to the consumer, maybe through advertising, for example. You try to convince them about your product and then hope that what they're going to do is they're going to pull the retailer back. So they're going to go to the store and say, hey, I've heard about this product. Do you have it? Right? And if you don't have it, why not? I want it because I've seen the commercial and it looks interesting. And what this is going to do is it's going to pull the demand through the manufacturer by focusing on the consumer. Of course, you can do a mixture of both, right? You don't have to only do one or the other. You can use the different tools to use both a push and pull strategy. Now, with all these tools, what are you going to do with promotion? Well, you're going to try to do a few things. One, obviously, is try to increase demand, right? So what you're trying to do with advertising, with publicity, and with things like sales and price cuts is essentially get more people to buy your product. This actually, makes sense. Now, other than this, which is the most common sense objective, you can try to stabilize demand. What do you mean by that? Well, for example, what you see is that demand oftentimes is seasonal. Okay, so if you track demand over time, what you will see is that it goes up and down. Okay, you can see this in things like toys, for example, right, which are highly seasonal. Most of the toys in this country are sold in about a 3-month period at the end of the year, right, around Christmas time. Okay, so in an industry like that, one thing that you might want to do is you might want to stabilize sales a little bit, because otherwise you only sell things in about 3 or 4 months of the year. So what you do is you provide some sort of incentive for people to buy it in other times. Who does this other than toy manufacturers? Restaurants, right? Restaurants will have things like happy hours, right? And the idea with a happy hour is try to stabilize demand because it's really low in between lunch and dinner. So what do? You throw in some sort of incentive that is going to make people come because it's seasonal. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to stabilize sales, try to keep them more constant instead of having high peaks and low valleys, right? Another thing that you might also be trying to do is remind customers about your products, especially if your product is not something that people are thinking all the time about. This happens with things like insurance, right? So reminding somebody that they should go and call their insurance agent and check the prices that they can get with your company might actually be a great idea, because most people are not all excited about insurance, right? So there are different objectives that you can have with promotion. The first one is the obvious one, but you can also use it to stabilize sales or maybe to trigger a purchase when otherwise people will not be that interested in at that time. So to summarize, there are many elements and tools that we can use in a promotional aspect of strategy, but it's important that all those elements are integrated and working together. Okay, they cannot be given different messages to the customer, otherwise it's not going to be effective. In order for companies to be good at anything really, they're going to have to do a good job in their marketing mix, all 4 P's, right? Not only promotion, and they're going to have to be good at coming up with a good product, good price, that is using the right channels of distribution and with the right communication strategy. Okay, so there is a lot of improvement that a company can make if they're working on these 4 aspects. And finally, for you to create a feedback loop, not only you need to keep improving your marketing mix, but you need to close in that loop with the customer and make sure that demand is actually there.